Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my LCS Week 5 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power ranking. Some things had to be shuffled around a bit this week due to some technical issues, but we're getting LCS out, right around the time that the next week is starting, so appreciate you guys holding on for this video, but a lot of good LCS action to talk about. We are now officially in the second half of the season, the second half of the round robin. We finished up week 4 with the Super Week and with, round 1 being done, and so we're jumping in now to week number 5. It's going to be really time for these teams to start stepping up and proving what they can before playoffs start. Remember, it's not summer, it's spring, which means that only the top 6 teams in the region end up making playoffs for spring, so you better get into gear now. It is still very wide open, especially the back half of the playoffs, so a lot of teams vying for that spot, but I'm excited to cover all of it in this video. Before we start, let me know down in the comments section below what you guys thought of week 5 here in the LCS. Who impressed you, who did not, who rose up your power rankings, and who is kind of falling a bit. Obviously, I know some obvious answers to this as we go further along, but definitely a lot of choices. I think that this week was pretty wild in the LCS. Of course, if you are new here, what we're going to be doing is going through all 10 LCS games from week number 5, going over my player of the game, my dud of the game, where I think teams are moving both in a positive and negative direction. I'm excited to jump into it, so let's not waste too much time. Let's go right into day number 1, and we kick day number 1 off with a pretty fun clash between FlyQuest and 100 Thieves. This was something that I think a lot of people were looking forward to. Obviously, the narrative surrounding Prince and Doublelift has been very good, but just any FlyQuest game right now in general is a blast to watch. There is a roster change in this one that we get to talk about as well. Finally, back in here for FlyQuest for the first time this split. It's Ayla in the support position. Winsome is back down in Academy or in Challengers right now, and Ayla is here. He's finally going to get the chance to play at an LCS level. I think Ayla's like the big prospect of LCS for me right now. Obviously talked about that a bit last year. I thought he was the single best player in Academy in 2022, and I'm really excited to see him get his shot. Obviously, Winsome's been pretty good. This team's 8-1 for a reason, but Prince has been super dominant in that bot lane 2v2. I think Ayla might just be an upgrade to Winsome and might make it even easier for them to be able to not only win early, but be able to transition that into late game wins. And FlyQuest just looks scary if that team is clicking on all cylinders, and that's kind of what happened in this game. Now, it wasn't perfect. 100 Thieves actually was able to generate at least a little bit of a lead in this game, and it was really off the back of Bjergsen playing really well in the early game on the Annie, actually being able to generate a considerable amount of gold. And Doublelift not really being awful. He certainly had some moments in the game where he was aggressive and looking for plays. Unfortunately, for 100 Thieves, they have to go into Prince, and Prince is just a cheat code at the LCS level. He is simply that much better than everybody else that he's playing against. He's an easy choice for player of the game. Just continues to dominate. I mean, 14-0-1 on Zeri does kind of tell the story of what ended up happening in this game, where you hit a break point, especially towards the mid game, where it's like you can no longer take a fight with FlyQuest because Zeri is going to blow you up. Now, there were some opportunities. There was that major unfortunate misstep from 100 Thieves where Bjergsen misses his stun by like a pixel, like his ultimate by like literally just a pixel, and Prince is able to eliminate the backline because they're all stepped up because they're trying to layer CC, and it's super unfortunate. 100 Thieves basically loses the game off of that play, but if it goes a little bit different, then perhaps, maybe Prince gets blown up in that fight. Maybe they do layer the CC. Maybe they are able to take him down, and maybe 100 Thieves is able to keep this game relatively close. Unfortunately, that's just not the world we lived in. Prince was just able to dominate, pop off in a lot of these team fights, in a lot of these skirmishes, get a ton of gold, and then just win the game for FlyQuest. This is really what we've been seeing a lot. I will say, credit to 100 Thieves for being able to corral him a bit in the early game, in like the very early game, but at the end of the day, it's Zeri Soraka. Like, it's not a particularly strong early laning phase, so, Prince not being as dominant in the early game was honestly at least a little bit expected from draft here, but he was able to play his role incredibly well in the mid to late game and was the biggest proponent to this FlyQuest win. Of course, not the only one. I want to give a lot of credit to Ayla, who did step in and played the Soraka really well. A lot of the target in this game was set onto Prince very early on from 100 Thieves. They knew they had to shut down this Zeri from an early point in the game, and I think that Ayla recognized that just sitting on Prince, sitting on this Zeri, especially in the mid game in a lot of these skirmishes, was going to be incredibly influential to getting FlyQuest ahead, and you know what? It absolutely worked out. Ayla was willing to bite the bullet. He was willing to take, some sacrifices in some of these team fights to make sure that Prince was safe and that he was in a good spot. And I think Ayla looked really good in his first performance here. Obviously not the biggest role in the entire game. No engager, not even really a disengager. Really just needs to make sure that Prince stays alive. But he did his role and he did his job. And it was a really good first showing. The only player that I would say on FlyQuest that looked a little bit shaky was Vikla in some of these team fights. Mostly because I don't think he pressed Zhonya's once this entire game, or stopwatch once this entire game as the Swain. In fact, he was going in. He's kind of the de facto frontline towards the back half of the game. The Vi was diving the backline, and so you're not really, focusing Vi, I guess you could say, and then the Renekton was on the flank with her. So, the peel was mostly left to Vikla on the Swain in the mid lane, and he just wasn't particularly great in a lot of these team fights. He was getting blown up very quickly, getting targeted very early on in fights, and was just kind of dying. He did get out some damage, but I think he could have done a lot more if he had just, pressed the Zhonya's button, so not exactly sure what was going on there, but Prince and Ayla were plenty enough to be able to win FlyQuest this game, and they took it relatively easily towards the back half. As for 100 Thieves, some good and some bad. I thought you had some good points in the early game. Bjergsen actually did a really good job in lane being able to generate that lead. Doublelift, I thought, had moments in this game where he looked good. If those two were able to pull off that stun combo towards the back half of the game onto Prince, I actually think this game could be very close, shutting him down, getting a lot of that gold. It just wasn't meant to be. Busio did his job. It was really the top side of the map that I felt was kind of disappointing for 100 Thieves in this one, and my dud of the game is going to go to Closer in the jungle. Now, I know I've been notoriously low on Closer for about a year now. I didn't think he was very good in 2022, at least in the regular season. He definitely stepped it up in the playoffs for this team to be able to make finals, but over the course of the last few regular seasons, it's felt like Closer has taken a little bit of a step back in terms of consistency, and that definitely showed up in this game as well, where it just felt like he had no impact on the Wukong. You're looking at Jax, you're looking at Wukong to kind of be these initiators, especially towards the back half of the game, but really a lot of it was on Bjergsen. If he wasn't initiating, if he wasn't getting this big stun ult off with Annie, then it just didn't feel like 100 Thieves really had a lot of avenues to be able to win the game, and that's not really how you want to be playing if you're 100 Thieves, and so I want to see Closer step it up. I want to see some more early aggression come out from him. That was something that he was always good at. It feels like that's fallen off a considerable amount, and I want to see him actually play these team fights aggressively. It feels like he's scared to go in. I'm not sure if that's Bjergsen making the call or Doublelift making the call or whatever, right? But Closer's just not playing nearly as aggro as he has in past seasons, and I do think it is harming him in a pretty major way. Tenacity also wasn't particularly great in the top lane. He had some moments on the Jax where he looked okay. He was able to pick up some kills in some team fights, but Impact was, just more relevant, I would say, in the top lane matchup. Those were the two that I think stood out as kind of being the least impactful on the side of 100 Thieves, but for the most part, they kind of went toe-to-toe with FlyQuest, or at least the main people, and they looked okay. I mean, this is a team that really wasn't supposed to be able to take a game off of them, but at least to come out and look like relatively competitive, I think is a positive overall for the team. As for FlyQuest, you're the best team in the league. There really is not a lot of debate about this. This is a team that should be coasting their way into playoffs and then really be looking to take that title and to be going to MSI as the #1 seed from the LCS, because they really are playing at a ridiculously high level right now, and I'm honestly scared that with Ayla coming in, it could get even better. That's how good this FlyQuest team is, and, Prince kind of showed that off in this one, I definitely think. Moving on to our second game of day #1 here, and it's one between two teams that I think really needed a win here to kind of bounce back, start to solidify maybe the second half of the year as being a little bit better than the first. Both are on a little bit of a downward spiral right now. We saw Immortals taking on Team Liquid, and TL does pick up the win, and they absolutely needed to here. If you couldn't beat Immortals, I was really going to start getting concerned with how good this team's ceiling actually could be. Obviously, we've talked a bit about, the struggles that TL has gone through in 2023 so far. They've been scrim warriors that have just not been able to put it out on stage, and we've talked a bit about why we think that is. Obviously, topside just not performing on stage is a pretty big problem, and they've always been very volatile players, both Summit and Pioshik, but, they really have not stepped it up in any sort of meaningful way at the LCS level, and this game finally felt like that happening. I'm not going to say Summit was perfect, because he certainly had some moments where he wasn't on the Gnar, but Pyosik in particular is going to be my player of the game here, and I think he's going to be basically everyone's player of the game on this Wukong. Pyosik has been bad. There really is no other way to say it in 2023 so far. He has yet to really have this big breakout performance in NA. This is it. I know it's against a bad team, but it is easily the best he has ever looked in North America. And that is a good sign. The fact that it's at least getting better, I think, is a good sign. For someone who is as streaky as Pyosik can be as a jungler, it's good to see him at least have a really good game here. Hopefully with the expectation that he can build on it in the future. This team has not been able to win a lot of games through topside. Summit has thrown away a lot of leads that he's been able to generate in the early game. Either that or he's just had bad laning phases. Harry has not been particularly good this year. One of the weaker mids in the LCS, in my opinion, and Pyosik, I think, has a really strong argument to be one of, like, the bottom 2 junglers in the LCS so far in 2023. To see them all kind of step up and play relatively well in this game, I think, was super important for this team to just be able to see happen on the Rift in front of a camera on stage. It's something they really have not been able to do, I would say, over the past few weeks. And so to see Pyosik come out on the Wukong and generate a really strong early game, be able to create a lot of pressure in pretty much every lane, and then have some really good engages in the mid game with that ultimate, that's encouraging. To see Summit go into a counter matchup here, playing against the Aurelia in the top lane, who does really well into someone like a Gnar, and for him to be able to not only survive, but actually play out the lane relatively well. Yes, he had some mistakes in the mid game, but you know, for him to actually be able to play out the early phase relatively well, that's a good sign. For Harry, to see him come out on a champion like Akali and be able to perform at a relatively good level in the LCS, that's a really good sign. Yan and Core have been good for most of the year. They've been the driving force for Team Liquid, but to see the top side really show up in this one, I think that's probably the most promising thing that you could possibly have seen from Team Liquid to start off this second round robin. I'm not exactly sure it's going to last. Again, I can't stress this enough, but Summit and Pyosik are the 2 streakiest players in the LCS, and it's not particularly close. So yes, they had a really good game here. I need to see the consistency come out from Team Liquid. As good as they were here, it is against Immortals, who we will get to. They are majorly struggling, and they're really just not all that talented right now, and so you would expect a team like Team Liquid to be able to beat them, but really what's going to kind of solidify whether or not this team is actually able to rise to where they should be in the standings, which is top 6, you know, somewhere around or above 500. To do that, Pyosik and Summit need to play like this more, a lot more, and that's really where the rest of the season is going to come in. But at least in this game, it was a really good sign. Zeri Annie as a bot lane is really funny to watch. Obviously, going into something like Xayah Nautilus, if you're going to be able to generate an early lead in that lane, it's basically over, but Yan and Core have actually been really good in the early 2v2, basically the entire season, something that I do want to give them a lot of credit for, but really, this game and this narrative was all around the top side for Team Liquid, which is why I kind of sat on that so much. As for Immortals on the other side, not a particularly good showing. This team really has kind of fallen back down to earth, you know, for the expectations that I think we all had for them going into the year. I think pretty much everybody that I saw power rankings-wise had this team at number 10 going into the year. Obviously, nobody expected Dignitas to be what they are so far, but to have Immortals, you know, show up and not really be able to go against Team Liquid, it's not super surprising, at least in terms of the players that are on each team. What's a little bit frustrating is just the fact that Immortals couldn't take advantage of a Team Liquid team that is struggling. I wanted to see them actually show up and perform a little bit better here against a team that really hasn't had a lot of cohesion and especially has not had good mid games over the past few weeks. I wanted to see Immortals kind of take advantage of that. Unfortunately, they just weren't able to. They got a counter pick in the top lane that lost for revenge. Jungle was a wasteland for Immortals, and those are the 2 lanes that I think were probably the most problematic on the side of Immortals in this game. Revenge in the top lane, and then my dud of the game going to Kenvi in the jungle, who just quite frankly got out-jungled by Pyosik. Vi, I always talk about this, needs to be able to generate an early lead, especially if you are the worst team. If you're the worst team and you don't have any sort of lead on Vi, she is super useless throughout the mid to late game, and that's kind of what happened here for Kenvi, is he just got to a point in the game where he could no longer actively accomplish any goal. I understand it. You pick Vi because you want to get on Zeri, but what happens when Zeri just one-shots you towards the back half of the game? What do you do after that if Vi's not fed? And so, you know, Kenvi kind of figured that out the hard way, and he's going to get my dud of the game here. He's been okay, and I think Revenge has been okay over the course of the year so far, but this was not their best game of the year. Blaze Olive was pretty bad. Tactical and Fleshy weren't very good in the bot lane either. Nobody on Immortals is stepping up, and I hate to say it, but it's not particularly surprising. This team just lacks the grand talent in comparison to even a team like Team Liquid, who is really struggling. Pioshik, Summit, Yon, Core, like these are all players that can show up and can perform well on any given day. Immortals just doesn't have players like that, and it's really going to be a problem for them as they continue to try and push for the top of the standings. I would imagine they continue to sit down here towards 9, perhaps even 10. Obviously, we'll talk about, some of the other teams around the bottom, but you can make a case that Immortals is the coldest team in the LCS right now, and I don't think that would be all that crazy to say. As for Team Liquid on the other side, just please keep this momentum up. The league is going to be better if Team Liquid is competitive, if Summit and Pioshik are playing at a relatively good level, if Yon and Core can be that secondary carry presence instead of being the entirety of Team Liquid like they have been for most of the year so far. Hopefully we can see these kinds of performances at a top side a little bit more often, but at the very least, they finally showed it at an LCS level in this game, and that's how it's all got to start, I guess. Moving on now to our third game of day number 1, and it's one that I'm super excited to talk about. Not only is it two teams that have really been, pretty good as of recently, but it's, a roster change coming in here for this series, or this game. We had Golden Guardians taking on Cloud9, and I'm really excited to talk about another Golden Guardians win. They are on a ridiculous hot streak right now. I mean, pretty good for an 0-4 team to be sitting at 6-4 after this, 6 games after starting 0-4. Certainly not, the worst thing that you could possibly do with your season. In fact, now you're sitting in a pretty good spot. This is a team that at one point looked like they were nowhere near the playoff race, but oops, all playoffs. Like, now you're looking really, really good. And you're taking down some of the best teams in the league. I mean, obviously, they weren't able to take down FlyQuest on their first run, or Cloud9 or EG or anything like that, but second run here, you just took down Cloud9, one of the best teams in the entire league, the reigning champions in the LCS. You play another really good team later in the week, and you get your chance to prove yourself in that as well. Overall, Golden Guardians looks phenomenal, and it's basically everybody on the team. We had been a little bit critical of some of the players, but basically all the question marks were gone in this game in particular. Player of the game for me is going to go to Gory in the mid lane. We talked about a roster change coming in. Cloud9 obviously making a change in the mid lane. Diplex is out. MNS is in. He's been dominating the NACL over the past, couple of weeks, couple of months. He's been really, really good down there and has been maybe the MVP of that entire league, has really been dominating in terms of his presence and his ability to win 1v1 or 1v2 and his ability to carry games, right? He's not this supportive mid laner like Diplex was. He's somebody who's going to be a lot more resource heavy, but going up against Gory in your first game, not exactly an easy challenge for someone like Eminus. And we'll talk about it, but Gory definitely came out on top. A great game from him coming in on the Sylas. We've talked a bit about how mid lane in the LCS is probably the weakest role that they have, at least in terms of top end talent. Gory's right up there with anybody. You can put him up against basically any mid laner in the LCS right now, and I think you can make a really solid case that he is the best mid laner in the LCS, and that's just really awesome to see. Obviously, someone who's gone through such a career arc of almost making it to Worlds in 2020 on that Nongshim team, or that 2021 Nongshim team, I should say, and then going to FPX in 2022, it not working out, ending up on PSG Talon, and, that team really floundering and really failing, quite frankly, to not make the World Championships, and then, getting a shot here on Golden Guardians, to really rebound your career, dominating in scrims, finally getting in and getting settled in around week 2, week 3 in the LCS, and here we are in week 5, and Gory's maybe been the best mid laner across that period of time in the league. It's really, really good to see he had a really good Sylas game here, being able to affect not only his laning phase, but pretty much everything in the game. Him and River have a really good chemistry together, and I do think that that's impacted Golden Guardians winning, especially in the mid game, a lot, because when jungle mid are really in sync, like River and Gory were in this game, and like they have been for most of the year, it just makes it such a dangerous combo when both of them are so talented. But that, kind of leads me into talking about River as well. He was really, really solid in this game. Probably the second best player. He was the one to capitalize, I think, on a lot of Eminus's mistakes. You could talk about Gory winning the 1v1 really hard, which he did, but River was the one to kind of really punish a lot of the misplays and the mispositions that Eminus was making. A rough welcome to the league moment, I would say, coming in from Golden Guardians here, but they executed on it well. One of the players that I've been really low on Golden Guardians, the player that I've been the lowest on, is Licorice in the top lane, who I've said has just kind of been a little bit of an issue for Golden Guardians up until this point in the season, and I stand by that. I certainly don't think he has been a strength for GG up until this point, but he was actually super good in this game. He dominated Fudge in that matchup. Fudge, who was a legit MVP candidate, up until this point in the season. He still is. I'm not saying he isn't, but Licorice obliterated this Jax into Gragas matchup, which is a really good sign. We know Licorice is talented. We know he's been one of the best top laners in the league for quite a long time, but it felt like he was kind of on the downswing. It felt like he wasn't necessarily still in his prime. This game kind of proved that wrong. He was really, really good in this one, and I'm really happy to see that. Unfortunately for Stixxay, his deathless streak goes out in this game. He still ends up 4-1-4. Really good game from him. Him and Stixxay obviously have such a good chemistry together in the bot lane. They've been able to very consistently win 2v2s. Basically, everybody on Golden Guardians is working right now, and you know, if you're a GG fan, congratulations. This is genuinely one of the best teams in the league. This is a massive win over a genuinely really good team in Cloud9, one that really solidifies this team as one of the best in the entire region. As for Cloud9, it's a rough way to lose your first game with a new mid laner, but honestly, this does raise some question marks for me as to the entire thought process behind the decision to bring Eminus up in the first place. Obviously, him and Diplex are basically opposite styles. Diplex, much more of a supportive mid laner, somebody who is going to be much more resource-less. You know, he's not going to need a lot of ganks in the mid lane. He's not going to need a lot of pressure. He's willing to go down in lane so that the rest of his team can generate pressure somewhere else on the map. Eminus is not that player. He is someone who wants attention. He's someone who wants ganks. Cloud9 didn't necessarily, feel like they wanted to play that way in this game, and that makes me question why you bring up Eminus in the first place. Yes, he is more talented, but he's going to need a little bit of assistance there in the mid lane to be the player that you want him to be. If you wanted someone who wasn't going to get ganks, who was going to be able to survive the laning phase, maybe go down a bit against Gory, but not really ruin your game, that's Diplex. And you bring in Eminus here and then you don't play for him. I just don't really understand the idea behind that. This team really wanted to get Berserker ahead, and I get that. Trust me, I get playing towards Berserker, but you gotta rescue Eminus in this matchup, and it just didn't feel like they did. He was really bad in this game. Easy choice for Dud of the game in his debut here. You hate to see someone come in and not be nearly as good as people expect, but it's just game one. You know, hopefully he can rebound. The mechanical skill is always going to be there. It's really going to be up to how he can fit in with the rest of this roster and the rest of the players here, most specifically Blabber in the jungle. If those two can develop a nice chemistry together, Blabber obviously being the one to kind of vouch for him when they signed him in the first place. If those two can kind of get on the same page and be pretty solid as a duo, I think Eminus is going to work, but that was certainly not the case in game number one here. Blabber was out jungled by River. Eminus was destroyed by Gory in the mid lane. River, obviously, helping that a lot, but Fudge losing in the top lane, not particularly good there. You really wanted to see Fudge be able to step up and just outplay Licorice. This is maybe the best top laner in the league, going against one of the worst top laners in the league, and to see it go in favor of one of the worst in the isolated 1v1, it's just not really what you wanted to see. It's not the MVP caliber performance that Fudge has been putting out. Berserker and Sven were pretty good in the bot lane, but by that point, top lane and top side had lost so much that Cloud9 really had no pressure on the map, and Golden Guardians had a really easy time closing out the rest of the game. I'll say this for Cloud9. They've definitely shown some flaws, some weaknesses that I just don't think some of the top, the top team in FlyQuest has really shown up until this point in the league. And I'm not going to say I'm concerned, but I need to see this team learn how to play around Eminus, because if you're just going to bring him in and just hope that he is exactly what Diplex gave you and then some, like he's just going to be able to win the 1v1s and he's not going to need any pressure and he's just going to be super isolated, that's not really what you're going to get with this mid laner. So unless they really change their game plan, I'm really going to keep questioning why they ended up bringing him up in the first place. But for Golden Guardians, really huge win here. You're now sitting at 6-4. You're legitimately one of the best teams in the LCS. If you keep this up, I mean, you're a top 2 team in the league. You just beat number 3. You could potentially be moving up even more if this week goes in your favor. This team has been unstoppable ever since, mid jungle really got on the same page, and ADC support really started stepping up and being some of the best in the league. If they keep this pressure up, this is a team that very realistically could be heading to MSI. And if you would have told that to basically any Golden Guardians fan at the beginning of the year, they would have been stunned to hear that, but that truly is the reality we live in right now. Moving on now to our 4th game of day number 1, and it's a good one. It's actually an old rivalry, one that the broadcast definitely told me does not exist anymore, which, we'll get into. I think it's a little bit sad. I understand why they want to make the point clear, but, the old fan in me is definitely a little bit sad to hear. But we have TSM taking on CLG, and CLG wins. They're the better team, and they prove that in this one. I think TSM has been a lot better than people anticipated, me included. I really expected TSM to come out this year and just not really be all that competitive. I haven't really been a big fan of Maple in his time in the LCS, but he's been awesome so far this year. Buki, I think, has really had some good games. Hasn't necessarily been consistent, but has had some good games. I think Solo is a rock in the top lane. All of that is kind of gone in this game. I know I'm kind of praising TSM right as they get destroyed, but you know, I think it's worth pointing out that TSM, I think, has been better than expectations, and this is kind of more a back to earth than it is TSM disappointing, in my opinion. That win over FlyQuest, insane, but CLG should be a team that is able to beat TSM, and they're able to do that here. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of spotlight on Palafox in this game. I think rightfully so. He is also going to get my player of the game here, mostly because those engages towards the back half of the game, if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to win these team fights towards the back half of the game. CLG is going to have a lot harder of a time closing this out and actually winning a lot of the fights towards the back half of the game. But, you know, Palafox doesn't have any engage, if not for Boogie. And so, you know, I'm not saying Maokai should not be blindable, you know, in the LCS or anything like that. I think Maokai is blindable, but perhaps, you know, consider the fact that Sylas from ahead can use Maokai ult and can layer it on top of something like Nami ult, and it can be a real problem for you to have to deal with, even if you have your own Maokai on the other side, especially if you throw out your ult too early, which we kind of saw. I think a lot of the pressure that CLG was able to generate in this game was from early pressure. You can look at the comps and look at the difference in mentality. You've got, you know, heavy pushing top and bot lanes coming out from TSM, but scaling coming out from the side of the mid lane and their main carry here in Maple. But for CLG, they just went for a more all-around approach, especially more in the mid-game here with the Sylas, with the Lucian, even something like the Elise, which is going to be able to generate leads early, but for the most part, you're going to pick one lane to kind of get ahead and to advance a lot quicker, to expedite the process of getting fed, and you're going to hope that they're going to be able to do a lot in the mid-game, and that's what happened with the bot lane here for Contracts, and then obviously Palafox was able to take over in the mid-game. So Palafox was awesome in the late-game team fights. The Sylas was super integral, but you got to give a lot of credit to Luger and Poom as well. They were the lane that was given a lot of the resources in the early game by the Elise, and they did a lot of good with it. Luger is just so much better than Neo, and I think that was really shown off in this series and in this game here, that he was able to generate, what, like a 40-50 CS lead by the time we hit the mid-game. Obviously, Contracts has a little bit to do with that, but credit to Luger, he is really good, and I think he's still slept on in terms of his impact at the LCS level. In my opinion, one of the top 3 to 4 bot laners in the LCS right now. He has been for a little while. I think he's really good. Neo, not so good, has not been having a great last few weeks, and we'll talk about that, but Luger and Poom just have really good chemistry together. They've played together, what, 3 years in a row now, and so it's just really good to see this bot lane continue to have success. It's good to see Palafox look good. It's good to see Dokla in the top lane take and absorb so much pressure on the side of TSM. They really wanted to try to get this Sion behind. I'm really not entirely sure why, but you even hit this point in the mid to late game where Maple is like full comboing as the Kassadin at level 15 or something onto Dokla, and he's just not taking any damage. This Sion can be incredibly difficult to deal with if you don't have a ridiculous amount of damage to burst through him, and unfortunately TSM didn't have that in this game. So basically everybody on CLG looking good. Not a lot of negatives to really point out. I liked how they played this game. As for TSM on the other side, not great. I mean, again, I hate to say crashing back down to earth, but it really does feel more like crashing back down to earth. I do think Maple is okay. Obviously, him and Boogie picking more scaling threats that are going to be relevant in team fights and leaving the early game up to your side lanes in this one. But unfortunately, your side lanes are a little bit of, you know, the volatile part of TSM right now, especially this bot lane, which has just continued to not be very strong, especially in the 2v2. Neo's going to get my dud of the game again here. That's, I think, the 4th time that he's gotten it this season. He has not been particularly good for TSM. I think there's been a big cluster of, I don't want to say bad bot laners, but, you know, bot laners that might not be at this level in the LCS this year. What with Spawn, obviously, getting replaced recently. Neo not playing particularly well. Tactical certainly had his moments where he's not looked great. TSM just doesn't look particularly strong when it comes to bot lane, and so when they play a team that has a really strong bot lane like CLG does, they just aren't able to keep up. Neo was down, like I said, 40, 50 CS at a point in this game, and it's not even a late point, like 15, 20 minutes into the game. It's just unacceptable. Not a very good game from TSM, and definitely not a good game from their bot lane. Solo also was just completely useless on the top side on this Renekton. He needed to be able to generate some sort of lead early, or else Sion, of course, is just going to perma outscale him, and he's not really going to be able to have any sort of impact on the game, and unfortunately that happened. You were relying so much on Boogie and Maple to be able to win this game for you, and unfortunately you just got to the point in the game where CLG had too big of a lead for that, you know, Kassadin to really matter at all, and so TSM frustrating loss. You're now sitting at 500 again. Hopefully you're going to be able to kind of rebound, stick around 500. That's where I think this team is probably going to sit. I think them and CLG are relatively similar in where they're probably going to end up in the regular season, but CLG, I think, proving in this game that they definitely are the better team, and they probably should be viewed as the better team. They're more talented on paper. They should be able to come out and perform against a team like TSM, and they absolutely did in this game, especially with everybody playing as well as they did. Palafox in those team fights, Luger and Poom in the early game, Doko just kind of standing there, Contracts knowing where he needed to be. CLG, when they're on, look really solid. Obviously, the consistency has always been a little bit of an issue for this team, but, when they play at their absolute best, CLG is a team that probably deserves to be mentioned right in that top 6 with basically anybody else. And that's going to bring us to our final game of day number 1 here in week number 5 of LCS action. And it's the biggest upset of the year so far, as we finally saw the bottom of the barrel claim victory. We saw Dignitas pick up their first win of the season against Evil Geniuses, a genuinely very good team here in the LCS. A huge win for Dignitas. They're actually able to pick up their first win of the season. Obviously, most people who are watching this video already knew that they were able to do this, but what a win for Dig. Super impressive stuff. Not only were they able to generate an early lead in this game, which is impressive in and of itself because bad teams just don't generate early leads, especially in modern day. It is very difficult for worse laners to beat better laners because it really is just repetition and consistency when it comes to that kind of stuff. But big credit to players like Jensen and players like Armut, who did a really good job in the early game being able to generate their own leads, and then credit to Santorin for being able to enable a lot of those leads. Tomo and Biofrost did a good job as well. Oh, I should note, there is a roster change in this game. Tomo is in, Spawn is out. Spawn has probably been the worst player in LCS this year. As much as I liked Spawn as a player, and as much as I liked what he was able to do in Academy last year, this was absolutely the right move to make. He just was not gelling with this team in one way or another. His confidence had been completely and utterly destroyed during his time in the LCS, and I think it was time to make a change. And Tomo is that guy. You can say what you want about Spawn, and obviously, Reddit's going to talk and, blame Spawn for every single negative problem that Dignitas has ever had. But, what Spawn didn't do was be aggressive. He didn't try to make plays. He didn't try to generate any sort of leads. He just accepted the fact that he was going to lose lane because everybody was telling him that he was going to lose lane. Tomo's not that kind of player. He's going to come in and he's going to try to make plays. Now, they're not always going to work. Sometimes he's going to get a little over-aggressive, and he did at points in this game, but for the most part, he was really positive, and Dignitas was able to generate an early lead off of basically every single one of their lanes looking pretty good here. Unfortunately, they almost threw it away. They were up like 10k gold, and they almost throw away the game here. Evil Geniuses do a really good job of team fighting back. FBI in particular looking really solid in a lot of these late game team fights on the Zeri, actually getting the peel and being able to pop off and deal that Zeri damage. If it wasn't for a miracle 4-man ult by Jensen towards the back half of this game, this very well could have been an Evil Geniuses win, but Jensen saves the game. That miracle 4-man is 0, and Dignitas is able to march down and win the game. Jensen's going to get player of the game for that. A lot of people have looked at Jensen as Dignitas' saving grace over the course of the year so far, but, obviously Jensen's had his problems as well, especially being able to take over games. This was the performance that we needed to see from Jensen. Not only was he really good in the early game, just outplaying Jojo Pune in a matchup that should go pretty in favor of the Jace, but obviously that ult towards the back half of the game was incredibly crucial and won the game for Dig on the spot. Really good game from Jensen. Fantastic to see him step up. And there really is no one more deserving to get the first player of the game of the split for Dignitas than Jensen here in the mid lane. But like I said, big credit to the rest of the team. Tomo and Ignar were definitely positive and a big improvement to what Spawn was offering in the bot lane, which is huge for Dignitas. I'm not going to sit here and say that this team is going to completely and utterly turn it around from this point, but big win from this Dignitas side, and honestly, it was basically everything I wanted to see from them in this game. As for Evil Geniuses, this is a disaster. Losing to Dignitas is the lowest that you can possibly go in the LCS this year, and you just did it. You just gave the 0-9 team their first win of the year, and you didn't look very good doing it. Like I said, EG just kind of lost early. I thought FBI and Vulcan were relatively fine. That's a lane matchup as Zeri Lulu into Lucian Nami that you're supposed to give up pressure in early, but FBI did a really good job trying to salvage the game. Outside of those two players, though, I don't think anybody on EG played all that well. Someday got destroyed in the top lane by Armut. Armut was just much better this game. There really is no other way to put it. Inspired got out-jungled by Santorin, especially towards the beginning half of the game, which is not really acceptable for a player like Inspired who has had good early games in the past. And Jojo in the mid lane. NA Jace coming out here in the mid lane gets beaten by Jensen in the early game, has basically no impact towards the back half. The damage is way lower than it needs to be. He loses a winning matchup. There really isn't a lot of positives I can say about Jojo, and he's going to get my dud of the game. He's gotten quite a few of these this year for Evil Geniuses. I don't think he's some sort of negative player for EG. Obviously, he's going to take a lot of risks. Some of them are going to work, and some of them aren't. But he's also going to have some games like this where it just doesn't feel like he's on the same level as some of the other players that he's playing against. And it's an 0-9 team that you're playing against. The consistency has always been an issue with Jojo Pyum, and that very much came out in this game. Hopefully, he can kind of get back on the right track. We know that he's an incredibly talented player, but it feels like he's regressed back to spring 2022. Instead of where he was over the course of summer, where it felt like he was significantly more consistent in a lot of their games. He wasn't being nearly as big of a hindrance when he would lose lane. He knew when to push his advantages and when not to, but it just feels like a lot of that has gone out the window this year. Maybe he feels more pressure to carry games. I don't really know what it is, but a lot of the mistakes that he ends up causing in the mid game are very problematic for Evil Geniuses, and something that this team definitely is going to need to work out if they want to be one of the best teams in the region. But right now, losing the Dig, like, you're not one of the best teams in the region. Hell, you're not really all that close to being one of the best teams in the region. And it's frustrating to say the least, because they absolutely have the talent to do so. But topside, really disappointed this game. I still think bot lane's been pretty good, but, you know, Someday I don't think has been what he needed to be for Evil Geniuses so far in 2023. I think Jojo's been a pretty big negative. Inspired's had some good games, but I think overall he's been relatively overhyped, especially by the analyst desk in a lot of these post-game segments. FBI and Vulcan, FBI in particular, is really the player that's driving Evil Geniuses forward right now, but he can only do so much, especially in a matchup like this. So EG's got to fix a lot of their problems, mostly the consistency thing. If they play at their best, like they have at points in the season, beating, C9, beating 100 Thieves, those wins were really, really nice. If you can do that more often, EG is a good team. If you lose to Dignitas more often and lose to, a team like Immortals maybe down the line, like, I'm going to be really concerned with what this Evil Geniuses team actually can be, and this is not a good sign of that. As for Dig, you just gotta get the monkey's off the back. You've got your first win of the season. I'm not exactly sure if this is going to lead into much more, but this team already looks so much better with Tomo in the bot lane just because of the aggressiveness that he offers. Obviously, he's talking a lot more in comms. That's something that is going to matter as well, but just the mental reset, hopefully, that this team can go through now having a new player should be super positive for them. I don't want to blame Spawn for everything. Obviously, he wasn't very good, but this team had more problems than just Spawn. It just feels like hopefully the mental can be a little bit reset, and you really want to see this Dignitas team be able to rebound and push forward a lot further than maybe they were able to do in the first half here in the second half, now that they have at least just a little bit of confidence on their side. Now moving on to our day number 2 here in week 5 of the LCS, and we kicked off day 2 with another rivalry that I guess isn't a rivalry anymore, with all the old rivalries dying. I guess this is another one, but probably the two most successful teams in NA history. We had TSM taking on Cloud9, and obviously that was a joke. I'm not sure that came across well. I forgot to specify. I'm joking around, but Cloud9 picking up the win here, and man, this is so much better than whatever the hell they showed on day 1 against Golden Guardians. Obviously, Eminus not with a perfect debut for Cloud9 in the previous series, but this can be kind of his real debut, I guess you could say, against TSM in this game. This is kind of what we wanted to see from the jungle mid duo. Obviously, both of them are very aggressive players that want to be able to get resources and, kind of funnel the game out of control. I guess you could say Fudge is very similar to that. You could definitely say Berserker is similar to that. I can see on paper where a clash of ideologies might come into play here, but when Blabber and Eminus are both on Assassins and they're both going absolutely psycho, then you get a game like this, where both of them look really, really good. My player of the game is going to go to Eminus on this LeBlanc. The double assassin combo coming out of the jungle mid duo here, not only with the LeBlanc in the mid lane, but the Rengar in the jungle. I think Rengar is actually a pretty good pick right now. I think he's almost underutilized by a lot of other teams. I know assassins in the jungle aren't necessarily the highest priority, what with the amount of CC and gank control that you can get out of a champion like Sejuani, or a champion out of Vi, or Maokai or whatever, right? Like, there's so many picks that give you so much CC and gank assist, and they scale into the late game really well, and they don't really need to be able to snowball out of control, right? Rengar is one of those picks that does need kills early and does need gold in order to stay in line and stay relevant with a lot of these other champions, but luckily for Cloud9, they bet on the fact that they were the better team in this game, and they succeeded. They won that bet. They are the better team in this game. Blabber and Emenis were everywhere on the map. Emenis was obliterating Maple in that mid lane matchup. He was able to generate a really strong lead for himself, and then they used that success, obviously as assassins, to just affect the rest of the map. Bot lane was a big problem, I would say, for TSM, especially towards the back half of this game. Neo actually had all the gold here for TSM. He was the one that they were definitely investing in and trying to get ahead. But, I mean, Varus, low mobility ADC into Rengar LeBlanc, like, good luck, buddy. You try your best. I'm not blaming this on Neo even a little bit. I'm just saying, really not a lot the Varus can do in that situation. Cloud9 did a really good job knowing exactly how they were going to win this game, getting their carries ahead, and executing on it. So credit to Emenis, credit to Blabber. Want to give credit to Berserker and Sven as well. I would say they were better in the bot lane 2v2. I think Neo did a good job being able to survive, but we'll talk about Chime in a bit. Some of those Nautilus engages were just not on point in this game, and Berserker and Sven, I think, did a really good job countering a lot of the aggression that Chime, in particular, showed in the early parts of this game. But this was definitely a jungle mid-focused game overall for Cloud9, and that definitely came through in the end product. But for TSM, kind of a rough loss here. Obviously, I guess Maple's Korean buff doesn't activate on Emenis because he hasn't played in Korea in a while. I don't really know how that ends up working, but Maple was not very good in this game. He certainly was far from the only one, but it felt like TSM was just kind of outclassed at basically every level. Mid lane got destroyed super hard early into the game, and so Emenis was out on the map playing with Blabber and making plays elsewhere, and it was really difficult for TSM from a macro perspective to be able to keep up with that. Solo wasn't nearly as good as Fudge in this game. Both on kind of, I don't want to say weak side, Tank's top lane, because Kasante can definitely be strong side, but both on champions that I think are totally fine just scaling into the late game here, tank-wise, and Solo just wasn't going to be nearly as effective in a team comp where the rest of the team is losing. Boogie, I thought, had a pretty bad early game on the Elise. You really need to generate leads early as that Elise, especially into something like a Rengar. If he's able to generate that lead early, you are a sitting duck for him the rest of the game. There really is no way for you to get back into that. Rengar and LeBlanc, Elise becomes incredibly irrelevant if she's not able to generate that lead, which she wasn't. And then, of course, I already talked about Maple, but my dud of the game in this one is going to go to Chime in the support position. I'm a big fan of Chime. Anybody who follows the channel knows that. I think he's a very underrated player here on this TSM team. I think if he had better teammates around him and if the team was doing better, I think he would get a lot more recognition for how good he has been for TSM over the past year ever since they put him in. But this was not one of his stronger games that he has ever played in the LCS. That I will definitely point out. Chime was just going in on the Nautilus, was not really locking anybody down, and then just kind of dying, and that's not really what you want to see out of your big engaged support. Obviously, I still think he's a good player. Neo was actually having a relatively okay game until the Assassins got super online, and then he couldn't team fight anymore, but before that, he was actually doing relatively okay. It was actually Chime in the bot lane that was creating a lot of the problems for TSM. It just always seems to be something with this team. There always seems to be somebody or some player or some, draft pick kind of holding them back and not allowing them to play to their fullest potential. I don't really know what it is with TSM, but they're a team that constantly feels right on the ledge of being able to live up to their potential. They look good in some of these games. They're able to take down really good teams like FlyQuest, but they're never really able to maintain that for any consistent amount of time. This is a team that probably isn't in the top 6 right now, if only just for the consistency, but honestly, I still consider this split so far an overachievement. This is a team that was supposed to be bottom 2 by most accounts, and they really have been competitive with a lot of teams. Maybe not so much in this one, but I think in a lot of games, TSM has really stepped up. Just not a very good showing and good performance in the last few weeks coming out from this roster. But for Cloud9, it looks like they are on track. If this is the way that they want to win games, just by playing completely aggro, trying to fight in the face of the opponent every single time that they can, I'm all for it. That's a really fun way to play the game. I'm not sure it's going to give you the consistency that you might want out of a team like this, but at the end of the day, this is a really nice win. You've got a ridiculous amount of talent on this team, and it finally feels like it's starting to come through as a unit. Hopefully they can keep this up. Hopefully Blabber and Emenis can stay on the same page. Berserker and Sven, Fudge may be more willing to take a backseat role now that Emenis has shown that he can carry at an LCS level. Hopefully, whatever the dynamic is on Cloud9, they can just retain it and maintain it throughout the rest of the split. Moving on now to our second game of day number 2, and it's a little bit of an interesting one that I was definitely interested to see if a team could continue the momentum they've been building as of recently, but They did. Not a lot of suspense here. We saw Immortals taking on Counter Logic Gaming, and CLG picks up their win here. They're second of the week, and they look pretty good doing it. I know it's not against the most dominant of competitions. TSM and Immortals aren't the two best teams in the league or anything like that, but CLG still coming out and looking good during this week, I think, is a really, really good sign, especially in this game where I really do think they looked particularly dominant. Obviously, Luger and Palafox were really the standouts of that first game. Palafox still definitely standing out in this game, and in my opinion, the player of the game, which you can see on the screen here, but you gotta give a lot of credit to Contracts as well, who had a really good game on the Maokai here in the jungle. He was able to control a lot of the tempo of what was going on and really allowed a lot of the other players on the team to be able to express their mechanical skill over their opponents. Players like Dokla, who had a much better game here than I think he's had in a little while. Players like Palafox, who just continue to kind of have a pretty decent, solid year. You know, not necessarily the best mid in the league or anything, but certainly not someone who I think is bad by any means and can definitely win you games at this level. Luger and Poom still really good here. I think Poom in particular was actually really solid in this one, and you know, obviously I've been pretty critical of Poom over the course of his LCS career, but I thought this was a pretty good showing, and overall, CLG just looked really good. Like I said, Palafox is my player of the game on that NAJs. He looked really good in the early game. He was able to generate a pretty solid lead over a Blaze Olive, but it was really those mid-game skirmishes that Contracts was a part of where Palafox really got to shine, really got to pick up a lot of kills. That Jace can do a lot of damage if left unregulated, and unfortunately for Immortals, that Jace was doing a lot of damage in this game, and Palafox really earning that player of the game. I still think it's more of a team effort overall for CLG than one particular player really standing out and being dominant, but Palafox had a really good week. Those engages on the Sylas in that first game against TSM, and now some of these like really, really high damage output games on Jace. It's just a really good showing for a player that I think still gets a little bit lost in the shuffle, even when he's kind of proven at this point that he deserves to be mentioned in the conversation of maybe not like the best mid laners in the region, but the upper tier mid laners in the region, definitely the upper half mid laners in the region. He definitely deserves to be in that conversation. And then there's Contracts. I think he gets kind of a bad reputation sometimes for being someone who likes to play only aggressive champions. Obviously has developed that because of his very aggressive playstyle, but go back and look at Contracts throughout the years. He really has done that aggressive playstyle on these more supportive, more engage-oriented champions. Things like the Maokai definitely fit into his playstyle. Things like the Sejuani definitely come to mind. The Gragas, you know, back in the day definitely come to mind for Contracts. But the Maokai this game was really, really good. Obviously, he was just able to generate a lot of jungle pressure early on in the game, which isn't pretty typical into the Maokai at least matchup. Kenvi wasn't really able to get the ball rolling in the way that he wanted to. Obviously, he tried with Tactical in the bot lane and was able to get at least a little bit of gold, but it wasn't nearly enough to set Immortals ahead. And CLG just had such an advantage on the top side of the map that they were able to kind of counter that, a lot of that. And Contracts was a big part of that. I think he had a really good game. He was everywhere he needed to be. Those ultimates, those engages towards the back half of the game were really big. Those are the two players that I really want to point out on the side of CLG for being really, really solid in this one. As for Immortals on the other side, I do quickly want to touch on the bug situation just because I think it's kind of weird, obviously. We had this big pause in the middle of the game for a bug check. Kenvi ends up dying at Baron. I thought that they were checking because Kenvi died in Repel to the Baron, and I thought that that was a problem. Like, I still think that that's a problem. I don't think that's supposed to happen, but they didn't end up finding anything. I think reportedly they checked to see if First Strike was the cause of death, and it wasn't, and they recognized that First Strike didn't bug out, and so they ended up saying no bug. Not entirely sure what the point of the whole bug check was. I thought it was because, you know, Elise died in Repel to Baron, but, you know, what do I know? I guess clearly I wasn't the one checking. Maybe it was a known bug going into the week or something like that, but Kenvi gets a little screwed over there, but Immortals was so far behind at that point, it was going to be pretty difficult for them to be able to win that game. Anyways, it was just kind of unfortunate that it ended up happening. Really not a lot of positives to take away from this game. You can look at some score lines and be like, oh, they were okay. Like, Tactical scoreline looks pretty good, but there were moments in time where he was half health, half mana, just walking up and farming in mid lane and getting obliterated by the Jace, and it's like, is your brain on? Like, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening here. But my dud of the game is going to go to Fleshy in the support position. We already talked about Chime not having some good engages on the Nautilus. Immortals definitely follows that up in game 2 with another bad game on the Nautilus here. This time coming out from Fleshy. He's been up and down, I would say, over the course of the split so far for Immortals. He's had some good games. I don't think he's necessarily been like a gigantic problem for this team, but I don't necessarily think he's been someone that is like Elo stuck in Immortals on a team that's not as good as him, right? This bot lane has certainly had some moments where they've looked good. Tactical has had moments where he's been able to step up and trade in the 2v2, and those aggressive, you know, early trading patterns go in his favor, but there's also moments where Fleshy is just not on the same page as his AD carry, and that felt like a lot of this game where Fleshy and Tactical just don't really seem to be on the same page. Top lane continues to be kind of meh. Like, Revenge and Kenvi have certainly had moments where they've looked good as a duo, especially spending a lot of time top lane, but you've got the Cassante in this game. That's something that Immortals has gone back to relatively consistently. And Revenge just wasn't able to keep up with Dokka on a more aggressive pick like the Gwen that's going to be able to shred tanks. And then Kenvi, wasn't able to generate that early lead, and that's Elise. And so not really a lot of good there. Blaze was fine in the mid lane. Palafox definitely able to generate an early lead there, but he hasn't been the biggest problem in the world for Immortals. Overall, this team's just not very good, right? Like, there's not a lot I can say. There's not a lot of creative ways that I can, share to you the information that Immortals just isn't as talented as a lot of the other teams that they're playing against right now in the league. I still think they have the opportunity to maybe surprise some teams, win some games that they probably shouldn't. They beat the CLG team earlier in the year as an example, but they're just not going to be able to consistently go up against a team as talented as CLG and be able to beat them in any sort of consistent way. I still think that, some of these players have potential. I like Revenge, relatively speaking, as a top laner. I don't think he's a superstar, but he can be like an average LCS top laner. Kenvi can probably be an LCS jungler if things go right, but there's just not a lot of other talent here on Immortals and not a lot of avenues for you to win games, in my opinion. As for CLG on the other side, it really is a team effort, and that's where CLG has always been at their best. When you look at 2022 Summer and why they were able to overachieve so much in that split, a lot of it was just because this team worked together so well. They were always on the same page. They knew what they wanted to do in the mid to late game, and they were able to capitalize on a lot of teams that didn't have that same kind of chemistry, and it really does feel like CLG is kind of back to that here. As good of a week as Palafox and Contracts and Luger and Dokla and Poom had, no one individual player is driving the train for CLG. It really is a team effort, a group effort here on CLG, and that's honestly more promising to me than it would be the other way around. You're not relying on one player to win you the game or to win you the series. You're relying on the team being able to step up and work together, and that is a recipe for success moving into the future. Moving on to our third game here of day number 2, and it's definitely an interesting one. Two top teams in the LCS, which I did not expect to say with this matchup. We have Golden Guardians taking on Evil Geniuses, and Golden Guardians with another big win. This team just cannot lose. They are on such a ridiculous hot streak right now. They have now won 7 games in a row. They started 0-4. Remember, through the first 2 weeks of the season, this team was winless, and now they're sitting at 7-4. Utterly unbelievable, an incredible run in form here from Golden Guardians, and it does not stop in this game. I can certainly tell you that. Another really strong early game, this time pretty much entirely directed by River in the jungle. We've talked about how good Gory has been in the mid lane of being able to generate his own 1v1 leads, and he was pretty good in this game. I certainly don't want to take that away from him on the Yone, but the early game, in my opinion, almost entirely directed and orchestrated by the Sejuani from River. An incredibly fun game coming out from him. He very narrowly earned my player of the game honors here for Golden Guardians. He was spectacular being able to control the jungle pressure, honestly just having significantly more pressure than a player like Inspired on the other side, the reigning MVP. And then being able to translate that into the part of the map that is the most important to translate to, which is the bot lane right now, with Zeri and Lulu down there going into something like Lucian Nami. If you can get that Zeri online, you are in such a good spot to head into the mid game, and that's what River definitely set out to do, and that's what he accomplished. And you know what? Congrats to the Zeri. Big ups to the Zeri. Stixay, who is my player of the game here, because he still had to play incredible towards the back half of this game, and you know what? He has, in my opinion, been one of the best players in the LCS in 2023. It is actually ludicrous. You want to talk about Gory and River being awesome, and especially being awesome together as a duo, synergizing well together. I think they have, and I certainly don't want to dispute that, because they have been awesome as a mid-jungle duo, but you have to give a lot of credit here to Stixay and Huhi in the bottom lane, who have genuinely been the second best bot lane in North America behind only Prince and Winsome, or Prince and Ayla. I mean, that's absurd, right? Like, that is a crazy thing to say. No one saw that coming going into 2023. I saw so many people saying Huhi was completely overrated for his time on 100 Thieves and that he wasn't going to translate to a team like Golden Guardians well at all. I saw a ton of people, me included, honestly, saying Stixay was going to be kind of a weakness for this lineup, that he really wasn't going to be able to drive home, this bot lane meta quite like, a lot of other bot laners in the league are going to be able to do. It's going to be way more similar to what Golden Guardians was last year, which was not particularly strong, but we were all wrong, because they have genuinely been terrific the entirety of this split, and you got to give them a lot of credit for that. Stixay's player of the game. You could give it to Huhi, you could give it to River. I think Broadcast gave it to Gory, which I understand. Again, that's more of a narrative award in my opinion, but overall, just a really, really good performance from everyone on Golden Guardians. Everyone is stepping up right now. They are all playing at a world-class, like, genuine high level over the past 7 games. And all we can hope for is for them to keep it up, because if they play like this, they are a genuine contender to lift the LCS trophy in spring. As for Evil Geniuses, this roster's frustrating. I mean, there really is no other way to put it. They are frustrating to watch play League, because they can have some games where they look so proactive and so macro-oriented, and so good at controlling the tempo and the pacing of everything that's going on in the game. And then they can have something like this, where it just feels like no one is actually talking, no one is on the same page, no one really knows what they want to do here. And it's frustrating because they have the talent to be one of the best teams in the league. That's why I had them ranked at number 2 in my power rankings heading into this, series. It's because they were able to take down teams like Cloud9, able to take down teams like 100 Thieves. Yeah, those games weren't close, but were close, I should say. But at the very least, like, winning is all that matters in a situation like that, and Evil Geniuses has found a lot of ways to win. This week, though, not so much. JoJo is going to get my dud of the game again here on day 2, just like he did in day number 1. Another really poor performance coming out from the Evil Geniuses mid laner, and he's honestly had a lot of these this year. There really is no explanation. He had a bunch of these in the beginning of the season. It felt like weeks 3 and 4, he really settled in, and, this team was really starting to find its stride. Him and Inspired kind of got back on the right track. They were making plays around FBI, who was having a good season in the bottom lane, but, this week was horrible for JoJo. This felt like a huge reversion back to, week 1, or even before that, like spring split 2022. And that's just not what you want to see. You want to see a player like that continuously improve and continuously grow. It wasn't even the over-aggression. He honestly just got out-mechanicked, out-skilled by a player like Gory and players like River, and that's just not a good sign. Hopefully he can pick it back up, because I love JoJo as a player, and he absolutely should be one of the best mid laners in North America, but this season, this split, honestly, he just hasn't been, and it's not really been all that close. As for the rest of the team, Inspired kind of got jungled off the map by River. He was just so much better in this game, River was, that is, than Inspired was. He had no pressure on the Vi, and I always talk about it. If you get behind on Vi, that champion is relatively useless. FBI and Vulcan, I guess, had some pressure, but Stixay was always going to do more in team fights, and that was definitely shown through. Someday had a good job, had a good game on the top side, I will say. Licorice, not exactly the strongest of competition on the top side, but Someday did a good job at least being able to kind of generate a lead on one of his signature picks in Jax. It's just unfortunate because the rest of the team really did crumble, and if this mid jungle does not pick up and they don't get back to not even MVP level, but just like winning League of Legends level, I don't think EG is going to be like a top 3 or 4 team in the league. Like, it's just, it's really interesting to see this team, I don't want to say collapse so much this week, but play down so much this week. Hopefully it's just a blip on the radar. They're now sitting at 7-4, the same record as Golden Guardians. They are tied for 3rd place at the moment, and, obviously things can go right for this EG team. We've seen them at their highs, but this is them at their lows, and they're really going to need to find out a way to make sure these don't happen nearly as often as they are right now. As for Golden Guardians on the other side, you look so good right now, and it's really easy to like this team. You just have to hope that they're able to keep it up. River, Gory, and Stixay might be the strongest, 3-player combo in the league right now. I mean, FlyQuest obviously would like a word with that, but Golden Guardians is right in that conversation, which is insane to say, considering the preseason expectations. I just really hope this team can keep it up. This org is super easy to cheer for, and these players are really easy to cheer for. I'm really hoping that we're looking back in, the end of spring and saying this was the start of the Golden Guardians dynasty. Moving on now to game number 4 of day 2 here, and it's a little bit of a rivalry. Obviously, some player rivalries going between these two teams, mostly on one side, but it's fun nonetheless. We had Team Liquid taking on 100 Thieves, and 100 Thieves stop the bleeding. They stop the losing streak, and they're able to pick up a win that they desperately needed here against Team Liquid. They were the better team in this game. You can look by the score. It was relatively close, but 100 Thieves were definitely better. It was a little bit of a slow burner, I would say, for them overall, but once we got to the late game, their team fighting was just significantly superior, and they were able to take the game basically off of that. I see a lot of discourse kind of surrounding this game, and surrounding Team Liquid as a team in general, so I'm excited to talk about them after, of course, I finish talking about 100 Thieves, who I think were relatively okay in this game. They kind of played a style that I thought was going to be a little bit more prevalent for this team, at least going into the year, mostly just because of the 2 carries on their team. You're looking at Bjergsen, you're looking at Doublelift. Well, Probably going to be a little bit of a slow team. That's just kind of historically how these two have liked to play, most specifically Bjergsen. Doublelift, though, as well, also likes to be on these more AFK scaling teams, not really the early aggression types, and for them to come in and, you know, kind of speed up the pace a bit at the start of the year, got me a little bit confident that, oh, maybe this team is going to play, you know, a little bit fun to watch League of Legends, but I would say overall, this is probably the style that we're going to expect most from them going forward in 2023, and it kind of worked out for them here. Bjergsen's going to get my player of the game here. I think Broadcast gave it to Doublelift. I do kind of understand that because Doublelift was a little bit more influential, I would say, in the early to mid game. Bjergsen was 0-0-0 until like 21, 22 minutes into the game, which is fine as long as you're able to deal a lot of damage in these team fights, and that's what Bjergsen did, is he absolutely took over the game once we got past 20 minutes. This Victor got his death cap, and then all of a sudden, no one on the enemy team could step up without instantly getting deleted. It was a really good showing from Bjerg. This is how he likes to play the game. You can criticize it all you want, but it does win. Like, I know people hate to watch League, and, you know, they're going to try and point and say, well, it's not going to work against international teams. This style works, and it can beat international teams if you are good enough at it, because you do have aggressive laners outside of that. Closer's a good early game jungler, at least. You know, he has been a good early game jungler in previous years. He hasn't quite been in 2023. Doublelift and Busio have good lane pressure. You can play through that lane. Bjergsen being a more scaling-oriented mid is not necessarily a problem when he is arguably the best team fighter at that position in the LCS. So I really do like kind of going back to comfort here, especially when you're on a massive losing streak, getting Bjergsen in a position where he can just dominate the late game. That's what he wants to do, and that's what he did. The Victor was really scary to go into. Not only was he doing a ridiculous amount of damage, he did a really good job zoning the carries out of fights for Team Liquid. 100 Thieves were really struggling with keeping the big damage dealers off of their backline, and Bjergsen getting strong basically eliminated that from moment one of nobody can dive the Victor any longer because he's just going to blow you up. He's going to step up aggressively. He's going to make sure players like Jan and Harry can't get into this fight. And without those two, you're just not going to be able to win the game if you are Team Liquid. And so credit to Bjergsen, credit to 100T. I thought they played well, but Doublelift and Busio also have to be credited for a pretty strong early game. They were the lane that I think won the most in the early going of this game. Credit to the Zeri Lulu. It's really not supposed to generate a large lead at all into Lucian Nami, but as we've seen, Lucian Nami not particularly strong in the meta right now, especially with the changes. It feels like it's only a matter of time before people realize that and stop picking it, at least nearly to the prio that they have been picking it now. I understand that it's something that's supposed to win early, but we're in a league where people don't push their early advantages nearly hard enough, and so things like the Zeri Lulu are honestly really safe in the LCS because you're probably going to hit a point in the game where you can team fight, where you are going to be able to get that 5v5 after 2 items. It's just probably going to happen at an LCS level because games, generally speaking, just go longer. Early game advantages aren't pushed nearly as hard. And so for Doublelift and Busio, being able to take over a bit on that Zeri Lulu, that was really solid. Tenacity did a good job in these team fights on the Cassante. I pointed this out on Twitter. Go follow me on Twitter if you haven't. But he actually did a really good job on this Cassante of, and this is going to sound weird when I say it out loud, of not ulting. And that's going to sound weird of like, why would you not want to ult in a team fight, especially when things matter? It's because he realized that this team doesn't really need damage. It's got Zeri, it's got a fed Victor, you've got a Vi for backline damage. You need Tenacity and this Cassante to be that frontline tank. You need him to be able to absorb a lot of damage, very similar to what the Scion is going to be offering on the other side. And so he didn't ult, he just stayed in tank mode the whole time. And that's really good game awareness coming out from Tenacity, and honestly, a really good play. I still think Closer's the weak link of the team right now for 100 Thieves, but he played a lot better in this game. He had pressure in the jungle. He was better than Pioshik, even if it wasn't by like a ridiculous amount. And he was actually able to generate at least a little bit for 100 Thieves and for his laners to be able to take over the game. So credit to 100T. Thought they played the game relatively well. Not perfect, but relatively strong from them. As for TL, man, I just don't agree with the public perception of this team even a little bit. Go on any sort of post-match Reddit thread, go on any sort of Twitter thread, any sort of social media thread, and you're going to see a lot of people saying, this is what happens when you trust your game to NA players. And you know what? I agree. Jan did not have a very good game. This is one of his worst games of the split. But taking a look at TL as a whole, it is impossible, and I mean this, genuinely impossible to say that Jan is the problem on Team Liquid. Even that Harry is the problem on Team Liquid, who Harry's had some real bad games. He's gotten dud of the week on this channel before. You know, I've talked about how I don't think Harry has really been all that good for Team Liquid, but to say that those two are the problem and that Summit and Pioshik are elo held on this team, I think is such a naive thing to say, And quite frankly, like, I don't mean to call an opinion wrong, but that opinion is just objectively wrong. It is not, they're not elo held on this team. If they were playing better, Team Liquid would have won more games. It is just the truth. Yan and Core have easily been the best part of Team Liquid. Summon and Pyosik have not been. Now, that was kind of flipped in this game where Yan really struggled early on, especially to be able to deal damage in the lane, out of the lane, pretty much in the team fights. He was doing basically nothing because he was getting zoned off the entire fight by a very aggressively posturing Victor. You know, I'm going to say he could have played better. Absolutely. This is one of his worst games of the split, and I'm not trying to, you know, distract people or anything from that. And Summit did play well in this one, I would say, on the Scion. Relatively speaking, he was able to survive so much as that pure tank. I think this is the kind of champion that really fits his style. Obviously, we've seen a ton of Gnar come out from him and even more aggressive picks, you know, in the past. But, you know, something like a Scion, I think, really does fit how Summit likes to play the game, which is really aggro and sometimes without real, you know, thought. I think you can play Scion without thought, and it can probably work out for you. So, overall, I would say that the roles were kind of switched this game, but Pyosik's been the worst player on this team, and I don't even think that's really all that debatable. He was really good earlier in the week, but he just didn't really have a lot of pressure in this game. Some good engages on the Wukong that just did not matter at all, because the disengage on the side of 100 Thieves is way too strong. The early game was meh, and I would actually argue this is probably his best week of the season, if only just for the Immortals game earlier, but Pyosik's been bad, and anybody who says that he's elo held on this Team Liquid team is just not watching the games, because Pyosik has not been a top 5 jungler in the league. He's not been a top 6 jungler in the league. He's been a bottom 2 jungler in the LCS in 2023. He has got the talent to turn that around, but he hasn't done it yet. And you know, I don't want to blame... I think sitting here and blaming Yan and Core for TL struggles is such a misrepresentation of what the problem actually is. And I hate to say this, I hate to make such grand sweeping statements, but it's the reason why teams continue to flounder is because they look at Reddit and they see, oh, Yan and Harry were the problem. Let's go buy more Koreans. And it's Pyosik having a shitty split, and it's Summit flipping every game. And it's like, okay, well, you know, if we're not going to identify the problem, how are we ever going to get better? And so, shout out to Reddit. They continue to influence all esports to be, all esports teams, I should say, to be stupid. Even to this day, if reports are to be believed about how organizations make decisions. But it is what it is, rant aside. Team Liquid's fine. They're just not very good, right? These are two teams that have the same record, but they're nowhere near the same level of consistency and cohesion. No one walked into this game feeling like it should have been close, and it wasn't. I mean, it was, like, in score, and that's because 100 Thieves has trouble closing out games, but Team Liquid was never expected to be able to win. Why? It's because nobody really has faith that anybody on this team is going to be able to step up and really be that carry. That's why they fall to number 8 in my power rankings. It's because this team really doesn't feel like a playoff team right now until a lot of things change. 100 Thieves was on a complete downward spiral. If you were ever going to be able to take advantage of a team like this, now was the time, and yet you couldn't do it. It's definitely disappointing, but I think we have learned what Team Liquid is, which is just a not very good team. As for 100 Thieves, hopefully you're getting it together. You've had a really tough schedule as of recently, but even outside of that, you haven't been able to pick up wins against teams that you absolutely should be beating. So hopefully this kind of gets your ass into gear. This is a team that definitely should be somewhere around top 4, but they really haven't performed like it recently. I'm not exactly sure where that's going to land them in the power rankings, but you know, it's good to see Bjergsen get back to more comfort. Doublelift and Boostio have been really solid. Tenacity had a good game. Hopefully Closer can step it back up and become one of the better junglers in the league again, because that will really kind of get them back on track in my opinion. But as it is right now, still some major question marks surrounding a team that absolutely should be in the upper echelons of the LCS. And that's going to bring us to our final game of week number 5 here in the LCS. And it's a good one. Well, you know, story-wise, it's a good one. It's number 1 versus number 10 in the standings as we saw Dignitas taking on FlyQuest. And FlyQuest does get the job done. I wanted to try and keep the suspense high because Dignitas taking down EG. What if they were able to take down FlyQuest as well? Unfortunately, you know, EG's a little bit different. FlyQuest a little bit untouchable at the moment, if we're being entirely honest. Maybe with the exception of that one TSM game. But we're going to put that behind us because FlyQuest really is that good right now. They are unstoppable. So ridiculously strong. And this game really proved it. It was over basically from moment 1. You have this giant fight in the top lane that goes super in favor of FlyQuest. Impact has a bounty before he has a single CS in the entire game. Santorin's dead. Armud's dead. You know, Impact is super far ahead. Now Spica has full control of the jungle, and man, does he take advantage of that, because the rest of the game is Spica on this Amumu. He's making plays in the top lane, expediting that process. He's making plays in the mid lane, making Jensen's life a living hell. Bot lane was a little bit untouched for a while, but he eventually got down there. I mean, really, what a game coming out from FlyQuest jungler. He's going to get player of the game in this one, and he has genuinely been phenomenal. I have nothing else to really say about Spica because I've talked so much about him on this channel over the years so far. You can make a really strong argument he has been the best jungler in the LCS, and I understand that he's playing for the best team, and sometimes it can be like, you know, me especially, like knowing my analysis, sometimes I like to draw the line between, oh, you're just on the best team versus you're actually the best performing member of your role. I think Spica's honestly kind of gotten the opposite treatment out of most LCS fans. I think a lot of people have looked at him and been like, you know, you're just boosted. Prince is really good. He wins you all the late games. Impact and Vikla have had really good years. Spica's been the second best player on this team throughout the entire year. Vikla's pretty close, right? Obviously, Prince is number one, but like, Vikla's been really good, but Spica's right up there with him, man. Every single game, it just feels like Spica's able to generate some sort of lead in the jungle. He's able to expedite the process of getting somebody on the team super fed, if not just everybody on the team super fed. And then they go into this late game and he gives them everything they want because he's been picking something like a Mumu every single game, where he's just this big CC bot that gives everyone on the team all the time in the world to play the game that they want to play. Spica has genuinely been phenomenal and perfect for this FlyQuest team over the course of the year, and this game is just an example of that. This Amumu pick is gigantic for FlyQuest. It's why they keep going to it, because it really does give them everything they want, which is just layers of CC. Prince just needs time. If you give him time, he's going to be able to win you fights. Vikla, if you give him time, he's going to be able to win fights. Spica's just giving everybody time. Now, obviously, you've got the funny 9-man sleep play part 2 in this game with the Amumu ult hitting everybody on Dignitas and nobody on Fly following up. That's going to happen sometimes when you play Amumu. Sometimes you're going to go in and the team's not going to be ready for it, but still a great engage by Spica, and big credit to him because he's just been so freaking good over the course of the year so far, and I don't think he gets the kind of credit that he deserves. Impact in the top lane was also spectacular. Obviously, the level 1 happened and it got this Renekton super far ahead. Impact on Renekton is not something we see super often, but when it gets pulled out, it can be a lot of fun to watch like it was in this game. He obliterated that Olaf in the top lane matchup. Really, really fun matchup there for FlyQuest that definitely went in their favor. Vikla had another really good game. Prince and Ayla were solid, even though they definitely were not the focal point, which is insane. This is probably the FlyQuest game where Prince got lost in the shuffle the most. He was still really good, but, you know, Tomo had a good game on the other side, and he was definitely dealing a lot of damage on that Zeri. I think bot lane was a little bit more contested than it had been in pretty much any other Prince game up until this point. It really was topside carrying FlyQuest to a ginormous win, and that's a good sign. To see that this team can win without Prince being the focal point is really good. I know it's not against the best team in the league, but to see Impact and Spica really be the two driving points for a FlyQuest win, that's what I like to see, and that's what I want to see more of in the second half of this season for FlyQuest. But for Dignitas on the other side, congratulations. You got your first win of the split earlier in the week. You were not able to get your second here. It's obviously a tough challenge to go against FlyQuest and to expect a win, but they played particularly bad. And again, we talked about how Impact and Spica kind of carried the game for FlyQuest while their counterparts kind of threw away the game for Dignitas. You can look at Armad's score and say that it was his fault, but it is impossible, genuinely impossible, to watch this game and not give dud of the game to Santorin. What was he doing? Where was he the whole game? I mean, the dude was farming or he was dying. Like, those were the two things that were going on. No actively good plays coming out for Dignitas from Santorin. I've talked about this quite a bit. I know Spawn sucks. I get it. He's not really that good at this level. He lost all his confidence. He didn't really feel like he could push up. Obviously, the comments started to get to him, and he just wasn't at a position where he could actually play the game at a high level, no matter what kind of skill level he was at. But you know who's avoided criticism for no reason at all this year is Santorin. I get it. The dude's a legend, and I love Santorin. Last year on Team Liquid, I was vouching for him as one of the better junglers in the entire league, especially for a team that just wasn't following up on a lot of what he was able to create. But we have to be honest with ourselves, man. Santorin's been the worst jungler in the LCS in 2023. We can say that Spawn and Ignar or Spawn and Bio not winning in bot lane is enough to cause Dignitas to go 0-9. But we all know that's not the case. If Jensen's as good as everyone says he is, if Arma can have a good top lane performance every now and then why can't they win games? Santorin loses every jungle matchup. He just doesn't have any synergy with anybody on this team. He doesn't know how to be aggressive, and he's not playing well. It seems like he's inside his own head. Hopefully he can get out of it, because I love Santorin as a player, but really 2023 has been awful for him, and I just have to be honest when I say that. I'm here to give you the analysis, and that's really the truth of it, right? People aren't going to sit here and tell you that Santorin's been the worst jungle in the LCS, but in my opinion, watching these games, he absolutely has been. He was destroyed in this game. That level 1 was disastrous, and what does he do? He does nothing. He cowers away. Arma gets destroyed on the top side, getting 3-man ganked repeatedly. He's nowhere else on the map trying to make any sort of counter plays. He's just going about his business. It feels like he's a bot trying to play against, he's an intermediate bot playing against a real human. That's what it felt like in this game. Not a good one for Santorin. Jensen also got kind of outplayed by Vikla. That's okay. Again, Vikla's really good. I'm not expecting the 1v1 to go in favor of you, especially when your jungler has 0 pressure on the map and the enemy jungler has a ton of pressure on the map. So no flame to Jensen, but Tomo and Ignar were actually pretty good in this game. I think Tomo definitely feels like he has a chip on his shoulder to prove something here in the LCS, and I think that's going to be good for Dignitas overall. I'm not exactly sure how long that's going to last, because I do think that Tomo has some holdups, mechanically speaking, in terms of being like a top player in the LCS, but he's playing pretty well right now. Hopefully he's going to be able to keep that up. Obviously going into Prince and Ayla is not the easiest task. For him to be able to hold his own in that matchup was honestly pretty good. I like the aggressiveness that this bot lane is showing. It's certainly different to what they were offering before, but this top side of the map folded, caved, crumbled. Santorin and Armut were bad. Santorin in particular very much earning dud of the game. As for FlyQuest on the other side, they're good. I mean, what do you want me to tell you? They're 10-1. They look like the best team in the league. This team should cruise to an LCS title. Obviously, teams like Golden Guardians now kind of catching up in terms of momentum. Cloud9, Evil Geniuses, 100 Thieves. These are all teams that should be able to at least compete with FlyQuest, but when they're playing their game, especially when Impact and Spica are driving the force forward on the top side, it's just so scary to have to go into this team. When Prince can have an off day and your team can still dominate the game, that's entirely terrifying, and that really does seem to be the reality we are now getting with FlyQuest. All right, that's going to do it for my LCS Week 5 overview and analysis of all 10 games across both days here in the LCS. Really excited to cover it. I'm having a lot of fun doing the LCS this year, a lot more fun than I have been normally, so I hope you guys are enjoying it as well. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated LCS standings after Week 5. Any ties will just be broken alphabetically, of course. In the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings in the second column. You're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week, so we can go over the biggest risers and the biggest fallers. Biggest riser this week, Golden Guardians. I'm buying the stock. They've jumped up to number 2. They beat Cloud9. They beat Evil Geniuses. They have proven that they deserve to be in the top 2 in terms of teams right now. This is the second best team and the second hottest team in the LCS, and I don't know how long they're going to be able to hang on to that, but at least for now, I would be remiss to not put them at this number 2 spot. They have leapfrogged Evil Geniuses, who drops down to number 4 after a really rough week. This team definitely has its problems. Mid-jungle just don't really seem to be on the same page right now, which is really concerning, and top lane's not really playing as well as they need to. I still think bot lane is strong, but EG definitely has its flaws, and enough so for me to knock him out of the top 3. Cloud9 maintains its spot at number 3, even though they lost to Golden Guardians. They do get leapfrogged by them, but I still think that they've probably shown a little bit more than Evil Geniuses at this point in the season. That means 100 Thieves is also going to fall down to number 5. They've kind of needed it for a while now, and this is kind of the nail in the coffin. I know they were able to end the losing streak this week, but that losing streak definitely took its toll on my opinion of this team, and for me, they've fallen out of the top 4. They rest at number 5 now. Only other change is CLG leapfrogging TSM. After beating them, they jump up to number 6. TSM falls down to number 7. CLG looks good. Not really a lot of complaints about this team. Like I said, they're a unit and they work well together. TSM, they're solid. A team that I think could compete with a lot of the top 6, but not one that I'm really expecting to be able to make the top 6 as of right now. But with all that said, let's go ahead and talk about my player of the week and my dud of the week here for week number 5 in the LCS. My player of the week, maybe a surprise to a few, is going to go to Palafox on CLG. I've always been a pretty big Palafox fan. I was vouching for him a lot last year. I put him in my all-pro teams last year. Longtime fans will remember that. But I really do like Palafox, and I think he stepped back up and had another really solid week for CLG this week. Like I said, they're a big unit, but they really do seem to focus through that mid lane, especially in team fights, where he is definitely the best of the bunch. And I really like Palafox as a player. Hopefully he can continue this big run of form that he's on right now. As for my dud of the week, this is probably no surprise to people who watch the games. My dud of the week is going to go to Jojo Pune on Evil Geniuses. This is his first dud of the week. I've kind of hesitated giving it to him over a couple weeks, even though he definitely probably was in the running in week 1, but Jojo's going to get it here in week 5 because he really just was not very good. That game against Golden Guardians was especially bad, where he just kind of got abused by that Golden Guardians team, by River, by Gory, by basically everybody. Even day number 1 against Dignitas, he was probably the weak link on that Evil Geniuses team that caused them to get majorly upsetted by the winless team, and so Jojo's really got to turn it around. Like I said, that mid-jungle seems to have no synergy, and a lot of these plays that Jojo's going for just are not working right now. He's got the talent to be one of the best players in the entire league. It just really hasn't come to fruition in 2023. Hopefully he can turn that around. So Jojo Pune is going to be my dud of the week in week 5, and Palafox is going to be my player of the week in week 5, but that's gonna do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. Who am I too high on? Who am I too low on? Who was your player of the week? Who was your dud of the week? You know I love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback down in the comment section below. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to the channel. I don't only cover the LCS, I cover all 4 of the major regions, as well as the NACL. So if you're interested in pretty much a full comprehensive LoL esports coverage all throughout every single week, then this channel is probably the place for you. I would really recommend you hit that subscribe button, and of course it helps me out a lot. And then if you did enjoy the video, if you're an hour and 20 minutes into this and you enjoyed it, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot. Not only does it tell me that you guys are enjoying it, but it helps get this video out to more people. And we do put a lot of time and effort into making these videos every single week, so I hope you guys did enjoy it. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.